Hey guys, what's going on? It's me, Jay, here to talk a little bit about the protests that are currently going on in the country of Mexico. Our neighbor, well, I live in the United States, so my neighbor to the south. Um, yeah, it is a protest about, um, basically, it's about government reforms because the people of Mexico, they are tired of being held captive by these drug cartels. They feel like the drug cartels are taking over their country. And a mayor of a part, Urupan, I think it's called, um, a city in Michoacan, this Michoacan state of Mexico, because Mexico, like the United States, Mexico is divided into several different states. So the mayor of this town, Carlos Manzo, um, was making a pledge to fight, to fight the influence that these drugs cartels have. And he was murdered in a special Mexican holiday called Dia de los Muertos, which is basically a day that, if you ever saw the movie Coco, it's a Mexican holiday and it goes back to the Aztec days when uh, Mexico, in the Aztec tradition where they would honor their dead, right? And it's connected to all. It became Catholicized with the Spanish coming, and it became like an All Saints Day in Mexico. So this was November the 1st. He was murdered on this day, and because of this, and nothing was done about it. The people that murdered him weren't prosecuted, so they're lashing out now on Claudia Scheinbaum, saying let's do something, take action because a little bit of history about drug cartels in the country of Mexico. Basically, in the 1950s and 60s, there was the trade between Mexico and another Latin American country, Colombia, in cocaine. But a lot of these newer cartels, like the Sinaloa cartel, the Juarez cartel, which was you heard about with regards to El Chapo, right? They're kind of newer. They trace their origins back to the granddaddy of them all, the and that was started in the 1970s, the Guadalajara cartel. But now what we're seeing is New Generation Jalisco and the Juarez cartel basically uh, to going the Sinaloa cartel and the New Generation Jalisco cartel going to war. And these cartels, like I said, they're controlling the country. Now, Claudia Scheinbaum, her response to this was to say that it was a vast right wing conspiracy. She's blaming conservatives for this protest. She's saying that conservatives in the country, she's on the left, right? She belongs to a left wing party. She's saying that conservatives are funding uh, this protest against her. Now, it could be possible because maybe the conservatives have the answer to getting rid of these cartels. Now, regardless of what side of the aisle you're on in Mexico, it's a very corrupt country. So politicians can be bought as well as politicians can be intimidated. We've seen several examples in Latin America where these gangs and these cartels, Haiti's a perfect example, that they've overrun the government and the government has been basically slaves to them. El Salvador is another example. But you know, yeah, the clash left 120 people injured, and it was mostly done by Gen Z protesters. Gen Z, people that were born in the 2000s but came up age in the 2010s. So I can imagine if you're Mexican and you grew up in the 2010s, you were surrounded and by a country that was unable to enforce its law. This is what you have when you have anarchy in your country. You know what I'm saying? You have gangs. That's what they basically are. These cartels are gangs running the country and buying off politicians and no control, you know? And they've grown up in this environment. This is all they know. You know what I mean? And they're probably sick of it. They don't really care necessarily about politics, right or left, liking Claudia Scheinbaum, not liking her. The point is, they want something to be done. And this mayor, Carlos Manzo, he was an optimist. He was promising that something was going to get done, and then for him to be murdered in cold blood like that, nothing to be done about his murder to avenge his murder. You know, we talk about in the United States, what if a major city mayor and a president, a head of state, are going against each other in a rivalry? Well, that's what was happening here. You know what I mean? He was calling out her government, and he was saying, "Look, her government is incompetent. They're not doing anything. They're being uh, the government is being held hostage, you know, and you're letting these gangs, you know, the Sinaloa cartel and the new generation Jalisco, you know, take complete control of everything around you. Like it's Gotham City. Like it's literally like what New York was in the 1970s when the mafia was controlling it, and different mafia groups would go to war from the 1930s to the 1970s. This was what New York was. You know, we talk about in New York our gang problem, and we have a gang problem, but the difference is when it comes to Latin America, and when it comes to the gangs in Latin America, this was the case for in Colombia for 25 years. For 25 years, um, the Marxist, the left-wing Marxist party and the right-wing parties went to war in a civil war, both controlled and financed by the Colombian drug cartels. You know, Pablo Escobar and those people. And those people, those drug cartel people, they were the ones that had the real power. The government officials, the presidents and the mayors and the municipality people, they were just puppets. The real ones that were running it were the gangs. So imagine that. Imagine, like, for example, to put it in context with America, imagine if the Bloods or the Crips ran the country. And there was a president, right, sitting in the White House, like there's a president sitting in the whatever they call the state assembly building in Mexico City. There's a president sitting there, but that president is controlled, right, David? Narcos, exactly. That president is controlled by the Bloods or the Crips in the United States. Imagine if that happened, right? Or imagine if and the and the person and they're powerless to enforce the law. They can't enforce the law because they're controlled. You know what I mean? Like they'll be killed too. That can't happen here for various reasons because, well, the Bloods and Crips belong to an opposite ethnic group, and this is basically and the ethnic group that is the main ethnic group of the Bloods and Crips doesn't run the country, but that's right. David is absolutely right. He was about to be the president of Colombia. But imagine if that happened. You know what I'm saying? That happened on a local level in New York City with the mafia. The mafia would pay off politicians, they would pay off police officers and stuff in the 1930s, the 40s. Uh, Al Capone basically controlled Chicago the same way. You know what I mean? But It never happened on a national level again because the people that ran the United States were WASP and they weren't involved with the mafia. But this is what happens in Latin America, where the mafia, and in some parts of Eastern Europe, I'm not sure about um, David's home country of Romania, but this happened in Russia in the 90s. The same thing happened in Russia in the 90s, where after the fall of the Soviet Union, uh, what crept into it, what came after it in the 90s was all these mafia people, all these mafia, the organized crime, Russian organized crime, that they were all in Stalin's gulags, all in the gulags of the former Soviet Union. And uh, they emerged out of that after the Soviet Union collapsed, and they were running the show in Moscow. You know what I mean? Boris Yeltsin, who was the supposed president at that time, was entirely powerless to do shit. So you had to have a strongman come in 1999, and that strongman was Vladimir Putin, and he basically got rid of all that shit. But when you don't have power, when you don't have strong power and strong leadership, this is what happens. You know what I mean? The powerful take control. The same thing is happening in Haiti. That's been happening in Haiti since the death of their president, Joel Mori, Jovel Moise, in 2021. That we talked about on that channel, the assassination of the Haitian president. So this is what happens in Latin America. It happens a lot in Eastern Europe. It happens in the Caribbean. Basically, anywhere where the authority of the government is really weak for whatever reason. And this war has been going on in Mexico since the 70s. Because, like David said, when Pablo Escobar was taken out, the central base of drug dealing and drug trafficking in the United States, in the Americas rather, switched from Colombia to Mexico. And that made it even worse for the U.S. because Mexico shares a border with the U.S. So that's when you started to see a lot of the heavy drugs come into our country, controlled by these cartels. You know what I mean? Like, the Sinaloa cartel, the Juarez cartel, the Guadalajara cartel, which was, like I said, the first one. Crystal meth, fentanyl, a lot of opiates, black tar, heroin started to come into the country after this. So they finally want to get it under control. And she's sitting there powerless because in their culture, why would they respect a woman? This is a Latin culture. This is about machismo, a culture that's rooted in masculinity, a culture that's rooted in Catholicism. They wouldn't respect a woman. You know what I mean? Like, especially like she's not a native Mexican. You know what I mean? She's not entirely Mexican. The name Claudia Scheinbaum, what does that tell you? Doesn't sound very Mexican to me, right? You know what I mean? You know, you know what I mean? So she's powerless to do anything, and I think she'll be overthrown. I really do. And it bring a lot of changes to Mexico. But if a right wing party takes over, if a right wing politician takes over and starts to clean stuff up, like the way, see how Bukele did in El Salvador? See what Bukele did in El Salvador? He took one of the worst countries, the worst country in the Americas that was dealing with this sort of stuff, controlled by MS-13 and controlled by, you had two factions of the gang. You had the Revolucionarios on the left and the Sureños on the right, battling it out. The gang was controlling the country, And Bukele got in there with a no nonsense attitude and just completely fucking cleaned up the country. And it it he's being criticized by some because of being a dictator, but this is what happens when you have chaos. You need a dictator to clean shit up, unfortunately. You know what I mean? So that's probably what'll come in. And if a right winger comes in, that'll increase the relationship between the United States and Mexico because we have right wing leadership in our country too. You know what I mean? Right now, Claudia Scheinbaum and Trump are kind of adversarial with one another since Trump's re-election in 2024. But uh, somebody else new comes in, we'll see. Maybe a stronger alliance and a stronger relationship. Nieto wasn't that good. The former president of Mexico, right? But so we just gotta wait and see. There's a lot of craziness going on, but it's just showing you that Gen Z is fed up. Gen Z in the United States is fed up. Gen Z in Mexico is fed up, and I'm sure Gen Z is fed up all around the world. I talked about this back in 2019 when we saw the governor of Puerto Rico thrown out, when we saw the protest in Hong Kong. Right? There's a lot of people that are fed up with their particular governments in this world, and the world is on the precipice of this. We saw this in Israel right before October 7th in Israel. We saw the overthrow, almost the overthrow of Benjamin Netanyahu. But with this Mexico thing, we have to wait and see what's going to happen and how that will impact the United States and Mexico's relationship. Peace, guys. Thank you, David, for contributing. Thank you guys for watching. Peace.